With the helium umbrella extending around coastal Americas, there were fewer places the submarines could ply their trade of death without being molested. Submarine lookouts cursed the blimps, sometimes hard to see amid the gray clouds.
Every time I raise my periscope, an airship is there.
World War I blimp pilot Captain Carl Lang was skipper at NAS Tillamook when 2 King ships assisted in an I-boat sinking off Oregon, but the report was classified for 50 years. Off Brazil, a K-ship tracked a sub and called in a bomber, which sank it, but the blimp crew was never given any credit. When a U-boat crew returned with an airship's sonar buoy, German intelligence must have realized the submarine had no practical way of detecting an airship, unlike the surface vessels whose screws they could hear. While anti-submarine tactics were increasingly successful everywhere, U-boat attacks around coastal America dropped off dramatically as the airship's value came to be appreciated. It is not known how many submarines were made mortally vulnerable or sunk by blimp action. Since airship attack was limited to submerged submarines, victory could only be verified by divers which were not available. But the war's unsung heroes were the ever-present escort airships, reporting for duty before dawn silhouetted the convoys against the horizon and warding off harm long after dark. There were stories of threatened mutiny among merchant seamen when blimps were unavailable to shepherd their convoys.
Blimp escort is the best sort of protection. It beats all other.
While they were the bane to Axis boats, our own submarines appreciated blimp assistance during shakedown and training. The hovering airship reported on dive performance, telltale bubbles, and noisy maneuvering underwater. Prepared and sometimes given safe passage escort through our own defenses, U.S. subs went on to be highly successful against the Japanese merchant fleet. Innovative blimp crews found even more ways to be helpful. Time and again, airships located wrecked airplanes and led rescuers to helpless victims. Airplanes often crashed in remote areas where no rescue party could reach the survivors. After locating one wreck, pilot Lou Ayres set his K-65 down on a remote island to rescue the grateful airmen. For this, Ayres received the Air Medal. Occasionally, twin-engine bombers on extended ferry flights ran out of gasoline that enabled them to remain airborne. Sent out over impenetrable jungle, an airship would hear Navy Blimp, Navy Blimp on their radio as thankful survivors saw the big bag as their rescuing angel. Sometime an LTA crewman would organize a hold-down party from survivors, or a blimp crew would hold its own short lines. Where there were large numbers of survivors or salvage was required, K-ship relay teams would execute the recovery. When impossible terrain would not allow a wheel landing to rescue a dying airman stranded in the California desert, pilot Pete Culbertson crash-landed his K-95 to take aboard 3 men. K-95, her props bent, eased back to an Army base where the victims were hospitalized. 2-bladed props were borrowed from Army airplanes, and she returned to Santa Ana. Culbertson received the Distinguished Flying Cross. Sometime blimps were positioned as lifeguards when airplane pilots trained over water, lest they drown when gravity claimed their heavy machines. But it was over water that the K-ship rescuers could not be equaled. Off the California coast, Ensign Laurel Baez maneuvered K-59 so his crew could lower a harness out the door. A bleeding victim was saved by the first sea-to-airship rescue of the war on March 3, 1944. Innovative airshipmen utilized a pulley above the aft door and rigged a breeches buoy. Then a man in the water could be hoved aboard. Now an airship arriving at an accident scene could not only lower a raft and provisions, but could actually collect the victims themselves. At-sea rescue became part of the routine. A counterweight was added through the wheel well to lessen the pull. Individual rigging came to be standard as word spread among commands. When the new M2, M3, and M4 joined the fleet, they added greater capability to the rescue effort. In the final count, at least 1,000 people owed their lives to airship rescue. Navy airships rendered 25 different types of assistance. Later King ships were equipped with aft-opening clamshell doors, making towing rescue possible. K-ships actually dragged small distressed vessels to safety. Exhausting its fuel, chasing a U-boat, K-68 was stranded on a Caribbean desert island. High winds led to her deflation. Sister blimps helped rescue one of their own. The K-68 would be rebuilt to patrol again. And K-90, downed in a horrific tropical rainstorm, was dug out of the jungle as shipmates ferried supplies. The constant demand for photographic overview, test torpedo chasing, and endless smaller tasks also needed airship support. Airship Utility Squadron 1 was commissioned to answer this need. Utility 1's G and K ships quietly performed many vital support missions, from chasing down loose barges to calibrating Army radar installations. As the war reached its production peak, buoyant vehicles tested everything from British hydrophones to new scatterbombs. Veteran K-2 carried the bulky prototype long-range navigation, or LORAN, gear. The nation's foremost airship proponent, Rear Admiral Charles Rosendahl, became chief of the Navy Airship Training and Experimental Command. The K-91, having survived a pre-detonating scatterbomb with Admiral Rosendahl aboard, later tested a 7-foot-long, 680-pound acoustic torpedo that could home in on its noisy submarine enemy. Building a new airplane carrying rigid dirigible still eluded its proponents, but adding a utility aircraft to a blimp would have enhanced its mission capabilities. Goodyear proposed the 1.5 million cubic foot O-ship to carry an airplane. A Piper Cub named Blimpy was flown under the M1 in a series of experiments to test the idea. The hitchhiker was then released to fly home alone. Meanwhile, Rosendahl had lobbied to get airships overseas, but a practice D-Day landing found U-boats still torpedoing Allied warships off England. When the call finally came for blimps to help crack Fortress Europe, little preparation had been made. ZP-14 was chosen to become the first in Europe. The 100th King ship, K-101, was among the 6 chosen to make the unprecedented deployment across the Atlantic. Leaving South Weymouth, 2 ZP-14 K ships used secret LORAN navigation gear that sister Ks had helped to develop. Masts were set up at Newfoundland and the Azores. They reached the Azores in 16 hours. Then, loaded with over 1,000 gallons of gasoline each, the 2 ships flew for 21 hours to reach Port Leote, French Morocco. K-109, K-112, and others soon followed. Inspired by their success, K-114 and another ZP-14 ship would cross the Atlantic via Bermuda in the Azores, a total of 3,530 miles. Squadron equipment was transported to North Africa, and ZP-14 set up headquarters at Port Leote. Improved MAD sensor heads mounted opposite on the hull for better port and starboard target resolution arrived just in time. Their installation would be the first of many actions ZP-14 crewmen would perform under challenging conditions. The Africa Squadron had its share of action and adventures. As Allied troops landed at Normandy, K-123 established a nighttime magnetic detection barrier across the Straits of Gibraltar. No Nazi vessel would ever pass again. A patrol base was set up on the island of Malta. Lieutenant Gordon Bodak's ship, the Flying Mayor, was a hit with senior British officers. An advanced base was set up on Sardinia, blimps becoming familiar sights to local farmers. One ship was christened Minnie the Miner as ZP-14 carried French officer observers and helped clear the waters Nazi mines in Operations Trump and Topiary. With Mussolini defeated, ZP-14 established a presence in Italy. K-101 shared a Roman field with army planes. Operating from Venice and Pisa, K-ships directed minesweeping operations to make Italian ports safe again. At Bizerti, sailors turned the tables on Il Duce while occupying an airship hangar other Italians built to fight the Turks. In 1912, ZP-14 proudly escorted President Roosevelt through the Pillars of Hercules and onto Yalta. When Allied troops liberated the French port of Toulon and Marseille, ZP-14 occupied the old French rigid airship base at Kurs. Freshly captured German prisoners were employed working on the old doors. POWs grabbed the Blimp's line, helping dock the first airship without a mast. Kurs became the Weeksville of the Med, complete with Goodyear representatives. Equipment built for servicing German Zeppelins now maintained Navy Blimps. Meanwhile, back home, squadrons competed for unbroken patrol records as the average K-ship worked 256 hours a month. Giant Squadron ZP-21 flew every day from November 1943 to 15 May 45. That's 965 consecutive days where at least one ZP-21 airship was on guard 24 hours a day. Each blimp was on the ground for replenishment for as little as 2 hours each day. Commander Vincent Astor's program for equipping fishing boats with radios paid off for ZP-11. On the 2nd of July, K-14 was dispatched to investigate a fisherman's sighting of a periscope off the Maine coast. The U-233 was laying mines off Bar Harbor. K-14 found her and attacked with depth charges, but U-233 fired a volley which struck after the car and burst out through the top of the envelope. The two combatants had badly damaged each other. K-14 hit the water hard, and owing to a new door safety catch, several crewmen didn't escape. The next morning, crewmen were discovered clinging to the floating bag. A few weeks later, K-25 spotted a 370-foot U-boat in shallow water off Chatham, Massachusetts. Attacking, K-25 blew a hole in the sub just after the conning tower. The largest U-boat ever made had been single-handedly defeated by a U.S. Navy airship, yet the details of the two combats were kept secret for 50 years. The Blimp's stable platform was invaluable to motion picture cameras, and ZP-21 Blimps had helped film Florida Keys set for a Pacific Island landing movie. Finally, Hollywood decided it was time to tell the airship story. This man's Navy featured a reserve commander, Wallace Berry, playing a chief petty officer who deployed with his blimp squadron to India. Hollywood crews worked at Lakehurst for weeks as the Navy supplied veteran K-2 for film duty. Santa Ana was used. Del Mar was dressed to become India. The movie wasn't just dreaming about using airships against the Axis in the Far East. German U-boats had joined their Japanese counterparts for deadly hunting in the Indian Ocean. The Axis partners were trading technology and vital raw materials with giant cargo submarines. ZP-14 skipper Emmett J. Sullivan dispatched officers to examine the old Karachi facilities. While the giant British rigid airships had never reached India, the facilities could have been adapted to blimps and support Indian Ocean operations. The U.S. Marine Corps barrage balloon squadrons had reached Noumea, but the Japanese were using LTA in the North Pacific. Launching firebombs with small hydrogen balloons, they considered employing biological weapons. A blimp detachment from Tillamook was established in northern Washington after a balloon bomb killed several civilians. The Japanese also launched thousands of floating mines to harass our fleet. K-60's alert crew saved the new carrier USS Gilbert Island from hitting a Japanese mine. American submarines were suffering heavy losses to Japanese mines in the Sea of Japan. Some officers realized the Blimp would be an ideal mine-spotting tool, but even the new M ship could not cross the vast Pacific. Perhaps a Blimp could be refueled from a flat top. Such a daring stunt had not been tried since the days of the rigid Los Angeles. In February 1944, Lieutenant Buzz Lloyd piloted K-29 out of Santa Ana to the escort carrier Altamaha, training off San Diego. No one was sure how this would work. Each vehicle would be moving in its own medium, but the test went well. While crewmen held the blimp lines to the carrier's cleats, a simulated fuel transfer was performed. By August, K-111 had demonstrated 72-hour endurance by rotating crews at 12-hour intervals off the carrier, Nassau Strait. 11 Kingships were ferried out to California, and Mikes followed. Yet despite Nazi and Japanese submarine success rates in the Indian Ocean and the mines in the Pacific, blimps would never fight there. Meanwhile, Brazilian President Vargas stopped into ZP-42's headquarters and made an inspection flight. Brazil decided to establish its own buoyant air force, and 40 men were sent to Lakehurst for training. Some of the aristocratic pilots thought their batmen should execute control commands. But the U.S. Navy had already begun to discount the need for bigger and better airships. There would be no ZRCV and no O-ship. M5 through M22 were canceled. When the K-135 arrived at Lakehurst, remaining production went into spare parts. After France was liberated, the Nazis were still sending U-boats out of deep Norwegian pens. On the 5th of May 1945, U-553 sank a collier off Rhode Island. The K-16 and K-58 located the raider the next morning, dropping depth charges to help surface units finish off the last submarine attack on American water. The Nazis hoped to wreak havoc with midget submarines. Blimps were repositioned as rumors about suicide submarines persisted. Intelligence warned of the new high-speed electric boat to be deployed from the still operational Norwegian submarine pens. To checkmate the remaining Nazi subs, Lieutenant Commander H.B. Van Gorder was ordered to take ZP-42 out of Brazil and redeploy 4 airships to southern England. Arrangements were made to use the giant hangars built for the R-100 and the R-101. In May 1945, German Admiral Donitz ordered his submarines to strike their colors. The crews waiting in England packed for home as ZP-42 ships were turned around. Surrendering German subs were escorted into American ports under the watchful eye of airshipmen. ZP-14 blimps were retained in the Mediterranean through 1945, when the British requested their expertise to continue minesweeping operations. Operating from 30 bases on 3 continents, blimps had escorted more than 80,000 vessels without a single loss. The Navy's LTA wings had been aloft some 500,000 hours, flying about 58,000 missions. Of some 860 operational U-boats, some 750 were lost to Allied efforts. We shall never know how many were defeated by airships alone, but we must never forget that a vessel saved with its precious cargo intact was worth far more than a sunken U-boat. No airship deployment came in the Pacific before the atomic bomb finished the Japanese dreams of empire. Airships escorted the victors back to American shores the blimps had guarded so long. The war destroyed some 20 airships, and with them some 80 brave Americans gave their lives. The men in their lighter-than-aircraft had proudly earned the label, "They were dependable."